Jesus, man, is on the main line. Well, my Jesus is on the main. Tell him what you. Jesus on the main line. Tell him what you want. Well, Jesus is on main. Tell him what you know. Call him up and tell him. Well, he will come in a hurry. Tell him what you. He will come in a hurry. Well, he will come in a hurry. Tell him what you. Call him up and tell him. Well, my Jesus, call me. Well, my Jesus is on the name. Tell him what you. Call him up and tell him.
Oh, freedom.
George and Gracie Jackson were the parents of Mariana Coates. Papa George was born around 1852 into slavery and was a house worker. He had one brother named Charlie who worked in the root cellar. It was passed down within the family that George took it upon himself to make sure that Charlie was fed well by sneaking food to him in the root cellar. The 13th Amendment was passed in 1865 and slavery was abolished. George Jackson and Gracie Baldwin were freed as slaves when they were young teenagers. They married July 1st, 1882 in Wilcox County, Alabama, and raised a family in Vineland, Alabama. They had 8 children. Their names were Molly, Jenny, Martha, Sarah, Lonzie, George, Mariana, and Viola. Grandma Mariana was the 7th child. Papa George had a daughter before he married Mama Gracie. Her name was Hattie, also known as Aunt Had. Papa George was a self-sufficient businessman who owned property consisting of 80 acres located at Route 1, Box 60, Marengo County, Alabama. This self-sufficient 80-acre farm was surrounded by livestock, including chickens, mules, horses, orchards, vegetable gardens, sugarcane, livery stable, and a grist mill. Mariana and her 7 siblings worked on the farm to help with the feeding of the animals, planting, and harvesting crops. In addition to being a well-known master farmer, Papa George was a highly sought-after blacksmith. Mama Gracie was a housewife and homemaker who loved to sew and take care of her children and grandchildren. She was also known as a very kind and loving person. It is ironic that the family survived the mid-1900 Spanish flu pandemic, which is very similar to what we are experiencing today in 2020. A family that prays together can truly withstand any storm. Papa George died September 29, 1932. Mama Gracie became blind from cataracts around 1929. She died April 3, 1940, at approximately 85 years old. Unfortunately, the family land and belongings were taken by Alec Gunn and Henry Gunn. It is known that Papa George was either one half Cherokee or Blackfoot Indian. Papa George and Mama Gracie's family were all members of the CME Church in Airmount, Alabama. With the exception of Molly, Mariana, and George Jr., they are all buried at the Airmount Church Cemetery. George Jr. is buried in Camden, Alabama. Molly is buried in Forest, Mississippi, and Mariana is buried in Lewiston, New York. Mama Gracie was a housewife that loved to sew. Papa George made Mama Gracie a chair out of wood with a seat of soft cowhide so that she would be comfortable while sitting at the sewing machine. The cowhide came from the family pet cow named Raleigh. As told to Richard Lee, Mariana's son, quote, "Raleigh was a good cow, a hard worker. They pet him, and then they killed him and ate him," end quote. Grandma Mariana refused to eat any of her beloved pet cow Raleigh. Mama Gracie used the chair while sewing her homemade crafts until she eventually became blind from cataracts. Grandma's husband, Raymond Sr., died in 1946 of heart failure, leaving Mariana a widow. In the late 1950s, she moved to Niagara Falls, New York to be near some of her grown children and grandchildren. Grandma Mariana lived in the Griffin Manor housing development located in the LaSalle area of Niagara Falls. She lived there from about 1962 until her passing in 1974. All of her children lived in the area with their families except Uncle Horace and Aunt Eula. They lived in Center Court. Uncle Frank and Aunt Helen eventually moved their family to Buffalo when they left Griffin Manor. Growing up on a farm taught Grandma Mariana many skills. She was considered a horticulturalist who could grow anything. Her beautiful flower garden was filled with marigolds, gladiolus, irises, chrysanthemums, sunflowers, and an assortment of others. She won the recognition of the neighborhood, and a newspaper article about her was printed in the Niagara Falls Gazette. Going to church was her life. Grandma loved the Lord and began attending Bethlehem Revival Temple in the early 1960s, where she became sanctified and filled with the Holy Ghost. Every Wednesday night, Friday night, and Sunday, you could count on seeing her there often with several of her children and grandchildren. This, along with her Christian spirit, earned her the title of Mother Coates. Grandma Mariana served as the mother of Bethlehem Revival Temple Church under the pastoral leadership of Reverend Wade Thomas. She had a favorite seat on the left side of the church and took great pride and joy in her love for Jesus Christ. Mother Coates, as she was known, always did whatever she could to help the church. Without using a sewing machine, she handmade prayer cushions for church members to use while kneeling in prayer. Reading the Bible was her favorite book. Teresa Booz lived with Grandma Mariana for about 2 months. According to her, Grandma would read the Bible each night for about 30 minutes before she went to bed. Grandma had 10 children. She loved her family and always had a listening ear, open arms, warm hug, and comforting words. Her children were Jenny, also known as Buster, Richard Lee, Lucille, Georgia Lee, George Frank, Horace Lee, Rosie Lee, Raymond Jr., Roy Lee, and Lanice. Grandma's children produce an extended family of 53 grandchildren. Not having a sewing machine, Grandma handmade clothing, colorful quilts, prayer cushions, and dolls, mostly from the fabric of old clothing. Again, her skills caught the attention of the community and the Niagara Falls Gazette newspaper. The epitome of generosity, her hands were always stretched out to the poor and needy. She would make canned fruits and vegetables, chicken and dumplings, cornbread, tea cakes, and layer cakes decorated with jelly beans, all from scratch. She gave from her heart and loved when children in the neighborhood came to her door for treats. Marianna Jackson Coates was the seventh child of George and Gracie Jackson. She was born June 1st, 1900 in Thomasville, Alabama, and died from a heart attack on May 13th, 1974 in Niagara Falls, New York. She is buried in the Riverdale Cemetery, located at 5605 Old Lewiston Road in Lewiston, New York. Because of your legacy, Grandma Miana, we will continue to keep families first